For tens of thousands of years, the only thing on TV was the sky at night and nature and other people's bodies. And we got really good at interpreting them for a very, very long time. So we had all these astrologers looking up into the sky, all these herbalists looking at nature, and all of these people looking at each other's bodies. And the traditions of palmistry go back tens of thousands of years. We have them all over the world. The oldest ones written down are the Indian traditions. The Indians have traditions of divination, of reading what's beneath the surface from what's on the surface, for all different bits of your body. There's divination on the lines of the face. There's a whole branch of divination on the belly button of a woman to see what kind of a wife she would make. I don't know enough about it because belly buttons aren't really that exposed very much anymore. However, hands are. And we're walking around with these books on the end of our arms. And today we're going to learn a little bit about what we can learn from these most expressive storehouses of information on the end of the hands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give us a brief introduction to the overview of how the hand works and why it represents what's going on in the mind, in the body, in the physiology, in the endocrine system. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at each other's hands. And in fact, hands are fascinating and I'm quite interesting. But feel free to start looking at your own hands, look at each other's hands as I'm talking, and see if you can find anything which is unusual or different to your hand. So have a look at the person on your right, the person on your left. And you might find, for example, that one person has a very long first finger, or perhaps their little finger is bent, or perhaps their headline is long or short, or perhaps their heart line is different to yours. So start becoming acquainted with your hands, because in most cases, the police know more about your fingerprints than you do. So there's this ancient art, for example, in India, people are learning how to read hands, at least a little bit, whilst they're learning how to read. But we have lost this art. And it's a real shame because it was a part of medicine for a very long time. You can read all kinds of health conditions from the fingers. I'll give you an example, what's called venous return. If you push the top of the hand here, top of the finger, and then you count how many seconds it takes for the white to go back to red, you can tell about the circulation, how quickly the blood returns. In a healthy person, a healthy young person, it's about 2 seconds. If it's colder, it might be a bit less. You can tell all kinds of things from the ridges in the nails, how the nails are constantly growing. So what's going on, for example, let's say 3 months ago, if something's going on, you can often tell because there'll be a calcium deposit halfway up the nail, because it takes 6 months for the nail to grow from here to here. You can tell from things about muscle tone, which affects the whole body, from how spongy or how flabby the hand is. You can also tell a lot about, for example, the endocrine system. In all apes, the third finger, the ring finger, is longer than the first finger, right? And in most humans, the same is the case. But in about 10% of humans, the first finger is longer than the third finger. And it's particularly common in women, less so than with men. The first finger governs our conscious selves. First finger governs the conscious self. And the thumb governs the will. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's very interesting. As we move through the apes, from monkeys through to chimpanzees, through to us, the thumb starts to come round. And we can think about how the will starts to move into opposition to the rest of the organism. Right? There are no monkeys or apes who go on hunger strike, for example. But human beings have found ways to kill themselves, for example, right? It's not other creatures where the thumb faces the fingers. It's only humans where the thumb is in opposition to the fingers. And it's only humans where the ego and the will can be against the rest of the body. So that's rather interesting. The first finger gets longer as you go through the apes, and with humans, the first finger can occasionally be longer than it is in longer than the third finger, for example, and this governs the conscious aspect of the person. All right. If you imagine a baby in the womb like this, right, the thumb is the closest thing to the baby, and often after a baby is born, the first thing they'll do is try and suck the thumb. The thumb in palmistry governs the will, and we hear this in our everyday language. We talk about being under somebody's thumb. You know, we express whether we want something or we don't with our thumbs up or our thumbs down. Yeah. So the thumb governs your will, and you can tell a lot about someone's will by, for example, how stiff the thumb is. Right. So have a look, see if your neighbour has a stiff thumb or a very floppy thumb. And then let's just for now, just make a note, just make a mental note of whether the thumb is stiff or not. And I'm just going to give an introduction for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to start talking about what it all means. I want to give you a general shape of the hand and a general idea of what it all means. So the thumb governs the will, and you can tell a lot about the will by the strength of the thumb, how far it's held out. Also, like the stiffness of the top joint as well as the bottom joint, and you can tell about the fingerprint or the thumbprint. Right? Have a look at your thumbprints. Have a look at your neighbour's thumbprints. You'll notice do you think you can pull that door back, which has got the fingerprints? Oh, just that one's fine. Just that one there, the one, yeah. So so have a look at the thumb and see if it resembles one of these prints over here. You might find that your thumb or your neighbour's thumb looks like a dartboard with concentric circles. You might find that your neighbour's thumb looks like a loop, looks like a wave, or it might be an arch, which is where the prints are shallower. So let me just tell you a little bit about the prints. The prints on a developing baby are formed in the first 24 weeks of development. So by the 24th week, the prints are fully developed. And identical twins have different fingerprints. Prints are somewhat genetic, but they're also influenced by the first environmental factor which the human being encounters, which is the amniotic fluid. And the way that they grow is fascinating. They grow like this. On the end of each finger in the developing baby, you have something called a volar pad, and it grows like a balloon, and then it shrinks. And the way that it shrinks, it leaves wrinkles. The same way a balloon shrinks and leaves wrinkles, the volar pad also buckles as it shrinks as well. And the wrinkles it leaves are your fingerprint. So you can tell, for one thing, how much it's grown. If it hasn't grown very much, you're going to end up with an arch print, which looks like this. Yeah, because it's grown a bit and then it's shrunk. If the volar pad has grown, but it's been affected a lot by the amniotic fluid, because there's pressure from inside and there's pressure from outside as the baby is growing, as this life is growing into the world. It's complete by 24 weeks. Oh, okay. So I shouldn't think so, no. But there may be other factors which are affecting the pregnancy, which lead to both prints being different and the child being born early. So I wouldn't like to say absolutely not, but no, but they're generally formed by 24 weeks. So, for example, if the volar pad is growing and it is pushed by the amniotic fluid in that direction, right? When it shrinks, it produces a loop because the balloon is kind of like squeezed over to that side. Does that make sense? If the volar pad grows straight out and then shrinks back in, you make a whirl print, which is the one which looks like concentric circles. So you can tell how the human is interacting with the environment, how much power is coming out of them in each finger, and each finger governs a different level of the self or the person, right from its formative interactions with the amniotic fluid. Right, that's how we get our prints. And that means you can kind of tell how much power is going into that finger. So what do the fingers mean? I'll just tell you briefly about what fingers mean, a little bit about the shapes, and then I'm going to stop talking. We're going to start moving around, and we're going to start examining each other's hands. The thumb is the will, the closest, the most intimate part of the self. The first finger is the conscious person. It's Jupiter in classical palmistry, and it's about the person. It's about the self and God. Often when I know something, oh, I know, or you behave yourself. So we use our index finger to indicate what we're interested in, for example. The middle finger is, as we're going through the layers of the self, is the structures that we build on top of the self, on the structures outside of the self that we interact with. In classical palmistry, that's Saturn. Yeah, so it is how we deal with knowledge and intelligence. People with long Saturn fingers tend to be considered more studious, more saturnine, more serious. Middle finger is the finger of seriousness. There's in fact a loop underneath it when you have like an extra kind of little fingerprint that's in between the ring finger and the middle finger, which is called a loop of seriousness down here. So that finger governs everything to do with structure. You very rarely find someone. You very rarely find someone who doesn't have a loop on that finger, because most people deal with structures by integrating with them. Some people have different prints on that finger. For example, I was once reading for a guy who had a whirl on his middle finger. Yeah, it's very rare. And I said, oh, this is a kind of architect's thing. Do you build structures and systems? And he said, yeah, I put in the international system for making banking payments for HSBC or something like that. It's very rare to have anything other than a loop there. The next finger is the ring finger. Now we're getting to the second half of the hand. This is what we send out into the world. Classically, it's Apollo. It's to do with our productivity. It's to do with our creativity. It's to do with our fame. Right? The longer that finger gets, this has been studied actually in depth. The longer this finger gets in comparison to that finger, the more likely someone is to start their own business. The more likely they are to end up in prison. The more sunny their disposition, right? Everything to do with testosterone, because this finger grows under the influence of testosterone in the womb, right? So the longer it gets, the more oomph a person has. And finally, the little finger is how we connect to the other. It's governed by Mercury. So it's to do with every form of transaction. So that could be how you go about making money. It could be how you go about communication. It could be your intimate life and your love life. It's also how you deal with tech and tools. And it's also how you deal with other spirits, other lives, other intelligences that are beyond us. Again, this is very rare to have anything other than a loop in the little finger. But if you do have something other than a loop in the little finger, let me know.